Push it to the max, get ready to relax, 'cause it's gonna be a Saturday night. I know a place just over the hill. If you wanna have a good time, you will. Way down south, just across
Across
the
the border,
border. So way down south,
way down south.
don't need no law and order.
Don't need no law and order.
Once you get down there, then you'll know. Way down south is the way to go.
Okay, this is the final essay in the fourth section of the 8 sections that we're doing in the Backbone 101 Year 1 course, Intro to Philosophy. For those who are trying to follow along, a modern introduction to philosophy, third edition, is what we're using for various reasons that we won't repeat here again. The Logical Behavior of the Word Good by R.M. Hare. Why naturalism is untenable. Let me illustrate one of the most characteristic features of value words in terms of a particular example. It is a feature sometimes described by saying that good and other such words are the names of supervenient or consequential properties. Suppose that a picture is hanging upon the wall and we are discussing whether it is a good picture. That is to say, we are debating whether to assent to or dissent from the judgment P is a good picture. It must be understood that the context makes it clear that that we mean by good picture not good likeness but good work of art, though both of these uses would be value expressions. First, let us notice a very important peculiarity of the word good as used in this sentence. Suppose that there is another picture next to P in the gallery. I will call it Q. Suppose that either P is a replica of Q or Q of P, and we don't know which, but we do know that both were painted by the same artist at about the same time. Now, there is one thing that we cannot say. We cannot say P is exactly like Q in all respects, save this one, that P is a good picture and Q not. If we were to say this, we should invite the comment, but how can one be good and the other not if they are exactly alike? There must be some further difference between them to make one good and the other not. Unless we at least admit the relevance of the question, what makes one good and the other not, we are bound to puzzle our hearers. They will think that something has gone wrong with our use of the word good. Sometimes we cannot specify just what it is that makes one good and the other not, but there always must be something. Suppose that in the attempt to explain our meaning, we said, I didn't say that there was any other difference between them. There is just this one, just one difference. That's the only difference, is that this one is good and the other is not. That's the only difference. In every other way, they're exactly the same. Surely you would understand me if I said that one was signed and the other not, but that there was otherwise no difference. Why should I say that one was good and the other not, but that there was otherwise no difference? The answer to this protest is that the word good is not like the word signed. There's a difference in their logic. Let us then ask whether there are certain characteristics of pictures which are defining characteristics of a good picture, in the same way as having all its angles 90 degrees and being a rectilinear plane figure, unquote, are defining characteristics of a rectangle. Moore thought that he could prove that there were no such defining characteristics for the word good as used in morals. His argument has been assailed since he propounded it. And it is certainly true that the formulation of it was at fault. But it seems to me that Moore's argument was not merely plausible, it rests, albeit insecurely, upon a secure foundation. There is indeed something about the way in which and the purposes for which we use the word good, which make it impossible to hold the sort of position that Moore was attacking. Although Moore did not see clearly what this something was, let us therefore try to restate Moore's argument in a way which makes it clear why naturalism is untenable, not only for the moral use of good as he thought, but also for many other uses. All right, before we go on, I'm not going to talk about what naturalism means because it's not clear to me how he wants to use it right now. So we'll leave that alone. But the first point he made is, look, if you're going to say something is good, are you saying something about the thing? And he says, well, if I've got two paintings painted by the same author and they're exactly the same and they were painted around the same time and they're hanging next to each other, and I say to you, one is good and the other is not, doesn't there have to be another difference besides that which would make it justifiable to say one was good and the other not? If they're exactly the same as each other, so think about it this way. If they were exactly the same as each other, except for the fact that one was good and the other was not, well, that would mean that what we were talking about with good was some objective feature of the thing, right? You get your goodness machine out and you scan the painting and it goes beep, 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 registers 0.74 on the goodness scale, right? It's like detecting the goodness as a thing in it. And what he's saying is, no, the only way something could be good or not good is whether or not other features of it have changed. It's not itself a feature of the thing, but it's maybe, well, we're going to see how he wants to define it, but you could imagine the collection of the parts or the way they work together or the function that they play or something like that. Is that, those are objective, some people would think, right? That's what some people might imagine when they say it's objectively good. Is like it has it has the quality of goodness in it, the way it has the quality of redness, or the way it has the quality of a balance of figures, or the way it has a quality of a type of brush stroke, that or a technique or something. But he says, but the goodness isn't like that, because there'd have to be something else different about it to say it was or wasn't good, which means it's really, goodness is dependent on other things which are objective, at least. All right, so we don't know where he's going, but we're speculating it's something like that. Okay, let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that there are some defining characteristics of a good picture. And we're not going to worry about an aesthetics philosophy right now where we come up with anything like that. Let's just say, for the purpose of argument, we actually had a list and we were like, these are the things that make a painting good, and these are the things that make it bad, or whatever. It does not matter of what sort they are. They can be of a single characteristic, or a conjunction of characteristics, or a disjunction of alternative characteristics. Let us call the group of these characteristics C. P is a good picture will then mean the same as P is a picture and P is C. It has the characteristics that we described, which would make a picture good. For example, let C mean having a tendency to arouse in people who are at that time members of the Royal Academy, or any other d- definitely specified group of people, a definitely recognizable feeling called admiration. Okay, there's a behavior we're going to learn about approaches to questions like this when we start our let's make an announcement. Next week, we are going to be continuing. This is the last essay in the first half of what we're doing on this course. We're going to continue doing that on Tuesdays only. And our Thursday and Friday, which we've been using to continue to go through this course for the first half, we are now going to start a philosophy of mind course and a philosophy of religion course. When we do the philosophy of mind course, we will be getting into certain types of perspectives that try to attack questions like these, that are very similar to what he just used right now, which is what made me remember it. So we'll get back to that in a second. But just to let everybody know, on Thursdays, we're going to be doing a new course where we'll be doing it exactly the same way, where we're reading one essay at a time and going through it, but it's going to be much more in depth, and it's going to cover like 9 or 10 different sections just of the philosophy of mind, as opposed to just the 5 or 6 essays that we've done on the small subsection of the philosophy of mind so far. And we're going to do the same thing with the philosophy of religion. So that'll be Fridays, and the mind one will be Thursdays. Okay, back to this. He says, okay, P is a painting of category of characteristics C, which is the characteristics that make it a good painting, whatever the heck that would be. And he says, okay, well, what if the characteristics we want to use to define a good painting are a group of people with well-developed taste. Each one of them stands in front of the painting and then reports to us whether or not they feel admiration. That's kind of cool, right? Like you're trying to find an objective way of measuring something very subjective, right? So the behavioralists, for instance, is one of the groups we'll read about in philosophy of mind, where they try to bring science as close as they can to these subjective things, and they come up with some interesting techniques, and there's some really interesting criticisms for them as well. But so that's cool. It doesn't matter what characteristics C are for the point of his argument, but he says, okay, what if that was what it was? Okay, so let's see what he says. The words definitely specified and definitely recognizable have to be inserted, for otherwise we might find that words in The recognize no, words in the definings were being used evaluatively, and this would make the definition no longer naturalistic. Now, suppose that we wish to say that the members of the Royal Academy have good taste in pictures. To have good taste in pictures means to have this definitely recognizable feeling of admiration for those pictures and only those pictures, which are good pictures. If, therefore, we wish to say that the members of the Royal Academy have good taste in pictures, we have, according to the definition, to say something which means the same as saying that they have this feeling of admiration for pictures which have a tendency to arouse in them this feeling, right? He's saying, well, there's a problem here, right? So first he says, look, well, we don't know where he's going to go yet, but he's going to say the naturalistic definitions aren't going to work, and he's going to start showing why. Okay, now this is not what we wanted to say, right? So the one thing we would do is say, okay, if somebody said, look, I don't know how to tell if a picture is good. I don't have a machine that'll like a Geiger counter register uh, radiated units of goodness coming from the painting, and I can hold it up and it'll go beep, 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 beep. Ah, this is a very good painting over here, right? There's nothing I can do like that. But what if I wanted to come close to that? And he wants to say, let's come as close as we can and then see that such a thing, if we think about the goodness as in the painting, as objective and away from these other things, that those definitions might not work. And we don't know where he's going and how he's going to solve the problem. But he says, okay, one way you might try to do that is to say, let me get a bunch of people together with good taste, well-educated people, highly cultivated personalities, and I'm just gonna ask them if they feel admiration when they look at the painting. So, stand here in front of this painting and tell me what you feel. Say, "Yes, I feel admiration," or say, "I'm confused or bored or repulsed," or something else, right? He says, then we'll measure all that. So we'll take like 10,000 people with good taste or 1,000 people. And we'll measure, oh, this painting, 998 of the 1,000 said they admired the painting. This one over here, it was more like 60 to 40, right? And so now we've got a way of quantifying it. He says, okay, let's try doing something like that. If we're going to try our best to get close to, measuring the objective goodness of the thing, it's not direct. But then he says, look, here's a problem. If you want to define goodness as these people like the painting, and then ask yourself the question, well, why can I use them? Well, I can use them because they only feel admiration at good paintings. But wait a minute, what was the definition of good painting? It was a painting that they reported feeling admiration for, right? It becomes circular at that point. All right, let's see where he goes with that. Now, this is not what we wanted to say, right? We didn't want to say these are the paintings that they feel admiration for. We wanted to say they're good paintings. We wanted to say that they admired good pictures. We have succeeded only in saying that they admired pictures which they admired. Thus, if we accept the definition, we debar. Oh, yeah. We debar ourselves from saying something that we do sometimes want to say. What this something is will become apparent later. For the moment, let us say that what we wanted to do was to commend the pictures which the members of the Royal Academy admired. Something about our definition prevented our doing this. We could no longer commend the pictures which they admired. We could only say that they admired those pictures which they admired. Thus, our definition has prevented us in one crucial case from commending something which we want to commend. That is what is wrong with it. Okay. I know from recent experience, a lot of people here listening in this class have lots of good things to say already about trying to solve the problem, right? We're going to keep reading and he's going to keep trying to show that this is a problem. But does anybody want to pipe in here and say, okay, yeah, I see that problem. Um, what would be a way of a way around it or a way of embracing it or a way through the other side? Maybe unmute and start speaking. Don't wait for me to pause. Maybe while we read the next paragraph, something will occur to you. Let us generalize. If P is a good picture is held to mean the same as P is a picture and P it has characteristic C, then it will become impossible to commend pictures for being C. It will be possible only to say that they are C. It is important to realize that this difficulty has nothing to do with the particular example that I have chosen. It is not because we have chosen the wrong defining characteristics. It is because whatever defining characteristics we choose, this objection arises that we can no longer commend an object for possessing those characteristics. Okay. If we had an understood list of what made a painting good, right? Let's say instead of saying, "Oh, these people that we think have good taste admire the painting," let's go a different route, right? Let's run the experiment he's running another 2 or 3 times just to see his point, because his point has nothing to do with the particular definition, right? So let's say what we do is we scan the painting and we perform a complex algorithmic analysis of it that looks for things like weight, and like weight meaning how large are things on the left versus the right, how brightly do they pull on you, all of the things that you would get in like a art history course for judging art and examining art and saying like, oh, it has diagonal lines and so it represents action, and it makes you feel unsteady, or it's very solid with vertical lines, and so the figures are standing like this and it's communicating the thing that it's supposed to be communicating, or whatever the heck it is. Let's say we had some list of actual like measurable. You could take a robot, you could put it into a computer, you could say, look at these factors, do they match up with these characteristics? If yes, then we call it a good painting, and if no, then we say it's not a good painting. It says, okay, well, what would happen? Well, what would happen is we wanted to say the painting was good, but if the painting is good because of some other features in the painting, we're saying the painting is good because it has these characteristics. But then when somebody asks us, how do you know it's good? All we can really say is it has these characteristics. Right? When we say it's good because it has these characteristics. Okay, so how do you know it's good? Well, because it has these characteristics. He says it'll always dissolve into just those characteristics, and you're not really talking about goodness, and you're not able to commend, which sounds like where he wants to go. He wants to be able to say, and he thinks we want to be able to say, and often we do want to be able to say to another person, go and meditate on this work of art. It will do you good. Right? This is a good work of art. If you're looking for something great that will bring ingredients of greatness into your life, statue of David, statue of Venus, go check out those things. This painting over here, right? That's the one to meditate on for a few hours. Well, how come? If somebody asks how come, you can't give an answer, right? Whatever your answer is for why, if it's in that sort of a thing that you can actually measure and be sure of, then it reduces to that being the important qualifier, right? The goodness isn't what you're talking about anymore. You've lost track of that. You justified that it's good by changing the subject to these other characteristics. But earlier he said, wait a minute, if I have two paintings that are identical, painted around the same time by the same author, it doesn't make any sense if they're identical to say one is good and one is not good. So now we've got two opposite problems. The one problem is that there has to be something about the thing that makes it good or not good, because it wouldn't make sense to say this one's good, but this one's not good if they're identical in all their particulars. But also, he's saying we want to be able to tell somebody there's goodness over there. You can find it. That's where I would look. Go read Shakespeare if you're looking for something to read. It's better than that grocery store pulp that you've been reading, if you ask me, right? If somebody says, well, what are the good? There's a reason we have a canon and it emerged in a certain way. We won't get into that. But we want to say, hey, there's some goodness over here. And he's saying, here's a problem. Here's a problem. If someone asked us to justify it and we had reasons, those reasons become the supreme thing. How do you know it's good? Well, because of these reasons. Well, then that's really what we're talking about now. But on the other hand, if there is nothing about the thing itself that could be measured other than its goodness, it doesn't make sense to say it's good at all. Like it has to be based somehow in that. So he's bringing up these two tensions. Let's see how he resolves it or what he does with it. Let us illustrate this by another example. I am deliberately excluding for the moment moral examples because I want to be clear that the logical difficulties with which we are encountering or which we are encountering have nothing to do with morals in particular, but are due to the general characteristics of value words. Let us consider the sentence S is a good strawberry. We might naturally suppose that this means nothing more than S is a strawberry and S is sweet, juicy, firm, red, and large. But it then becomes impossible for us to say certain things which in our ordinary talk we do say. We sometimes want to say that a strawberry is a good strawberry because it is sweet, etc. This, as we can at once see, if we think of ourselves saying it, does not mean the same as saying that a strawberry is sweet, etc. Strawberry because it is sweet, etc. But according to the proposed definition, this is what it would mean. Thus, here again, the proposed definition would prevent our saying something that we do succeed in saying meaningfully in our ordinary talk. Once again, we have this other inclination in thinking, right? We've seen extremes on both sides, but this is the one that says, look, we're trying to say something. He's not even saying it does mean something. He's saying we want to say it, we seem to say it, we succeed at communicating it to each other, right? If imagine this. Imagine Elena said, "I'm really hungry. Is there anything is there I know we have strawberries here. Are there some good strawberries here?" And I say, "Yeah, actually that bundle over there, we picked them out ahead of time. They're the best. They're really good strawberries. You should go and have a snack on those strawberries." What if she was credulous and she said, "Well, what do you mean they're good?" Right? I said, "Well, I think that you'll enjoy them." What if I said, "Well, okay, we measured how sweet, how large, how firm, and how red they were, and those were the ones with the qualities that matched up the best." Would she have reason maybe to am I really communicating what she wants to hear? Like, there's something else we could communicate and do communicate, which is something like, "I had some of them. They're awesome." That's different, right? That's different than those qualities. Those qualities about the thing are not enough, right? What if I said, "I've measured those qualities on these strawberries over here, so what?" Right? Like you say, "I wanted some good strawberries," and all you did was tell me that they have a lot of features that I know go along with good strawberries, but are they smashed? Are there worms in them? Like, what the heck? You didn't tell me they're good, right? Those are other qualities, of course, right? So we would have to just add them to the list. But he's saying we succeed in our ordinary language of saying something else besides good strawberries is a shortcut for a whole list of characteristics. It's actually something else that we're communicating. And so we have to figure out how that is because how could it make sense, right? If I said this is a good strawberry, that's not a good strawberry, and they look the same to you from the angle that you're looking at them, you might ask, well, what's different about them? Right. So that's the other side of the problem, right? So there have to be something different about them for one to be good and one to not be good, you would think. And yet it's possible, he says, to communicate goodness as something other than, more than, on top of, beyond just a list of characteristics. So let's see what he thinks. Meaning and criteria. Should we pause? This is a new section. Let's go on. It is a characteristic of good, the word good, that it can be applied to any number of different classes of objects. We have good cricket bats, good chronometers, good fire extinguishers, good pictures, good sunsets, good men. The same is true of the word red. All the objects I have just listed might be red. We have to ask first whether, in explaining the meaning of the word good, it would be possible to explain its meaning in all of these expressions at once, or whether it would be necessary to explain good cricket bat first, and then go on to explain good chronometer in the second lesson, good fire extinguisher in the third, and so on. And if the latter, whether in each lesson we should be teaching something entirely new, like teaching the meaning of fast die, after we had in a previous lesson taught the meaning of fast motor car, or whether it would be just the same lesson over again with a different example, like teaching red die after we had taught red motor car, DYE, die, right? Or there might be some third possibility. All right, this is a cool question. Elena, obviously we're going right back to some Socratic stuff. Savad, we went through Socrates at least twice, I think, right? Isn't this all echoing stuff that Socrates said a long time ago, right? I mean, it should we're gonna look at Socrates again, but at some point it's gonna start getting too much that all of this is footnotes to Plato in a sense. But um, okay, so here's a bunch of we can call lots of things red and we can call lots of things good. Um, can we just explain what good means and then we could just apply it to cricket bats and sunsets and chronometers and fire extinguishers? If or would we have to teach what a good cricket bat is and what makes it a good cricket bat? And then the next day teach what a good chronometer is and what would make something a good chronometer? And if we did do those different things, are we going to get at an ultimate definition that applies to all these different things the same, even though the particulars are totally different? Or is it going to be totally different, right? Like, so a red dye and a red motor car, they're red, but a fast dye and a fast motor car, they're not fast in the same way. It's like a totally different word. So does the word good mean something totally different when it's applied to sunset than when it's applied to motor car? Or is there something that the sunset participates in that can make it a good sunset that's the same thing the motor car participates in when it becomes so he doesn't know, but he's saying, who the heck knows, right? He's bringing up the questions and not answering them. Or it could be a third possibility. The view that good chronometer would be a completely new lesson, even though the day before we had taught good cricket bat, runs at once into difficulties. For it would mean that at any one time our learner could only use the word good in speaking of classes of objects which he had learnt so far. He would never be able to go straight up to a new class of objects and use the word good of one of them. When he had learnt good cricket bat and good chronometer, he would not be able to manage good fire extinguisher. And when he had learnt the latter, he would still be unable to manage good motor car. But in fact, one of the most noticeable things about the way we use the word good is that we are able to use it for entirely new classes of objects that we have never called good before. Suppose that someone starts collecting cacti for the first time and puts one on his mantelpiece, the only cactus in the country. Suppose then that a friend sees it and says, I must have one of those. So he sends for one from wherever they grow and puts it on his mantelpiece. And when his friend comes in, he says, I've got a better cactus than yours. But how does he know how to apply the word in this way? He has never learnt to apply good to cacti. He does not even know any criteria for telling a good cactus from a bad one, for as yet there are none. And he has learnt to use the word good. And having learnt that, he can apply it to any class of objects that he requires to place in order of merit. He and his friend may dispute about the criteria of good cacti. They may attempt to set up rival criteria, but they could not even do this unless they were from the start under no difficulty in using the word good. Since, therefore, it is possible to use the word good for a new class of objects without further instruction, learning the use of the word for one class of objects cannot be a different lesson from learning it from another class of objects, though learning the criteria of goodness in a new class of objects may be a new lesson each time. Where is Socrates? what's what's he been doing? It's almost like his spirit lives on in more ways than one. To teach what makes a member of any class, a good member of the class, is indeed a new lesson for each class of objects, but nevertheless, the word good has a constant meaning, which, once learnt, can be understood no matter what class of objects is being discussed. We have to make a distinction between the meaning of the word good and the criteria for its application. Okay, that was a pretty clear argument. I'm just going to repeat it though really quickly. All right, you live in a world where no one's ever seen a cactus before, all right? And you've never seen one and nobody else has ever seen one. But Magellan goes off, he sails around and he comes back and he gives a cactus to his friend. Says, "Look at this weird flora which I found on this faraway wild place." Okay. then you say, "I love this thing. I'm gonna study it. I'm gonna collect it. I'm gonna put it up on my mantle. I'm gonna see what I like this cactus." And you bring your friend over who's also never heard of a cactus or seen one before, and he looks at it, he goes, "Wow, that's amazing. I must have one. They're just so fascinating that something like that could exist. And I wanna I want to put one on my mantle place and think about it every day." So he says, "Hey, next time you're out, Magellan, here's 50 gold pieces. Go bring me back a gold cactus or a cactus, please." And so, our explorer, who I'm calling Magellan, not for historical reasons, but the explorer goes off, and 8 years later, he comes back with another cactus, gives it to this other guy. And so now there's two cactuses. And notice that he says, "Look, you can argue about what makes a cactus good. That you might argue about which one is the better cactus, right? That doesn't matter. Those are still both evidence for his argument, right? So his argument, he doesn't think, would be knocked down or attacked in any way by somebody saying, "Well, wait a minute, what if one guy thinks his cactus is better, but the other guy thinks his cactus is better? Or maybe they both think the other one has the better one, or whatever. Maybe they dispute about which is the better cactus." That doesn't matter to his argument. Says, "Well, what if they disagree about what would make a cactus a good cactus? They don't know much about cacti, and so maybe they've got it wrong, or one of them has it wrong, or whatever. And so they've got disagreements to argue out. Oh, a cactus is better if it has more needles. No, a cactus is better if it has fewer needles, or whatever. It doesn't matter. They're arguing about which one is better, as if they understand better apart from the cactus. They understand the idea of goodness as an idea itself, distinct from the category, let alone the qualities of the thing. So that's strange. But of course, that's the case. You don't have to actually teach what makes a good anything for somebody to start already asking if it's a good something, right? If you get introduced to a whole new category of things, you already have the word goodness as if it has a life of its own, as if it's about something other than just the particulars of the thing. Okay, so
May I ask something before we move on to the next portion? Okay. Is there any possibility, if he is so intentional with his words as Plato was, and Socrates, and in general the ancient Greeks, is there any possibility in him using these six specific examples: the cricket bat, the chronometer, the fire extinguisher, the picture, the sunsets, and the men, intentionally? Does he model something? Maybe facets of what we consider good qua good, where it can be just identified, or am I just scorching cells? I mean,
well, you might be
because,
onto something I don't know. So I'll have to
okay,
prod you. What do you think he might be doing?
I don't know if I see this because it is my inclination to see things like that, to see the metaprismatic fields, to see modeling everywhere, patterns and etc., or if there is indeed something there that
Hmm.
it hints, because pictures
It hints at
are,
what? Yeah, go
it,
ahead.
it it hints that there is a modeling there. There is something. These are six possible examples that model six categories where we can say, or research to understand and comprehend what is good qua good.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I think is his motivation in structuring the argument this way, and then I want to prod at what you are getting at because I think it might also be interesting and it might be something that he was also getting at, and I just don't know yet. So I think the reason why he took cricket bat and then chronometer on purpose is that what he was doing was this, sunset, good man, good sunset. These are all very different things. So the first thing I think he's doing is trying to show how different the categories can be in the way the word good is being applied. And yet the word good doesn't need to be learned in each of them. Like you can learn what good means when it comes to a good toy as a 3-year-old playing with your toys. Oh, I like this is my favorite toy. This is a good one, or whatever. This is the better of the two toy cars. And then you can understand and engage in a conversation about what would be a good person. And it seems like those are very different categories where if the word good really is 100 different words that all just happen to be spelt the same, but they apply totally differently, you wouldn't expect to be able to do that. So that's the first thing. And then I think he's using cricket bat because it's a tool that's very simple. And the way you use it is to try to, like, hit something, right? So a good cricket bat is integral and solid and easy to swing and that sort of thing. A chronometer is also an instrument, but what makes it good primarily is the fact that it reports accurately to you what it's measuring. Right. So, what the goodness of, they're both instruments in a sense, right? But the second one is a very different kind of instrument. So, I think he's trying to use these categories to just take us from, well, let's start with two instruments, but they're really kind of different in their category. And then let me show you, and I'm going to just continue that extension of making it weirderly different. And then say, look at how bizarre it is that the word good means something in all these contexts. And you don't have to relearn the word every time you get to a new context. So we've got good cricket bat, good chronometer. Then we've got good fire extinguisher, right? So a fire extinguisher is more like a cricket bat than a chronometer in the sense that it's there to accomplish something. Let me put it another way, because obviously a chronometer is meant to accomplish something. What I mean is, it's meant to be an extension of what you're doing rather than an extension of what you can sense, right? A chronometer is telling you this is what you're seeing, except you weren't able to see it as well as the chronometer. However, it's an extinguisher is more like a chronometer than a cricket bat in the sense that it's it's a tool that's doing something that you qualitatively aren't able to do, right? So you can hit things, but if you hit things with a cricket bat, it's an extension of your capacity to hit things. Whereas you don't have the ability to shoot foam out of your hands to try to put out small fires, but then a fire extinguisher extends that to larger fires, right? So it's like a chronometer in that it's doing something you can't do, but you can use it, but it's also pushing out into the world rather than sensing things from the world. So he's taken these first two categories and then he's shown how bizarre they are because he's got this third category. And then does he go to sunsets right after that? Good chronometer, good fire extinguisher, third, and so on. Da, 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 da. Okay, good. Good pictures. So now he's back to aesthetics again, right? So what makes it a good picture? We've already been talking about that, but that's a way weirder question, right? The aesthetic beauty, that's like a value judgment. That's like good man and good picture. They're in these other categories, right? Good picture is aesthetic, maybe good man is ethical, but it's, there's overlap and there's some strangeness. It's definitely a value judgment. Um, and yet it's still the same word good, and you don't have to relearn what the word means, which is his main point. And then between that, he's got good sunsets, which are like paintings in that there's an aesthetic quality to them, but they're like men in the sense that they're natural objects in the world. So they're not exactly like paintings, which are maybe slightly more artificial. Plato might think they're artificial in a pejorative sense, but obviously paintings are objects in the world too. But you see what I mean? It's like a sunset's like a painting that God made or that nature made or something like that. So I think he's using that set of three and this set of three to just sort of say, look, I'm going to give you examples that if you think good is the kind of thing that you could define in this context, it'd be a very, very strangely different context over here. And then a third one over here that's sort of like opposite to both of them, but the same as both of them. And then in the value realm, I'm going to give you another three that are doing the same kind of thing. So I think he's giving the categories, my guess was that he's giving the categories primarily to illustrate this point of how strange it is that it really is the same word good. And we don't need to relearn the word every time. So it means something. It means something apart. It means something he thinks that's the same about a cricket bat and about a man, even though the man maybe is aesthetic, definitely is ethical in the context that we're using it. And then good cricket bat is nothing like that. Right. And yet still they can both participate in goodness. So he's priming us for this platonic point. Yes. So so that was my take on it. However, I'm still curious. I'm still curious about this idea that so I'm going to ask, since I'm completely at a loss for guessing what you're getting at here, but I think it's interesting. My guess was that you saw the line of progression as also illustrating, or maybe primarily designed to illustrate something else as well, or other than that, which was something about the similarities between a cricket bat and a man, or I'm going to let you talk because I don't yet understand. But I genuinely suspect there's something interesting there.
Um, there is a connection amongst all. Maybe he just used these examples in exactly the way that you explained them, as to cover the whole spectrum of possibilities, from what is an extension of yourself, like the cricket bat, to what it could be considered a qualitative enhancer, as the chronometer, to something that could be considered qualitative addition or support, like the fire extinguisher, something that as a person, as a thing in the world, I cannot do, thus I need that tool. And then he goes to the more natural aspect, to the more natural aspect of life, of existence, where good qua good is more easy to be found, but in the way that he mentioned earlier, I think it was at the beginning of the essay, there must always be something there.
I think that's exactly right. I think what he's getting at, but I think for the same reason, what he's getting at by having all these different types of categories is to get exactly at what you're saying, which is there's something the same here. And these are totally different. Even the kinds of characteristics that might make the word apply, if you want to use characteristics, are totally different. The functionality is different in kind, right? And he's saying, and yet there's still something the same here. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? I think that's his
Yes,
point.
exactly.
I think that's
Okay,
exactly
thank
his
you.
point. That platonic point you're illustrating there is exactly his point. There's something, that's right. There's something the same through all this strangeness and all this differentness. Let's identify that that's the case and or see if it's true or just an illusion, but let's figure out what this word good really means and how we're using it. And okay, so next section, description and evaluation. There are two different sorts of things that we can say, for example, about strawberries. The first sort is usually called descriptive, the second sort, evaluative. The two different categories. Examples of the first sort of remark are this strawberry is sweet, and this strawberry is large, red, and juicy. Examples of the second sort of remark are this is a good strawberry, and this strawberry is just as strawberries ought to be. The first sort of remark is often given as a reason for making the second sort of remark. But the first sort does not by itself entail the second sort, nor vice versa. Yet there seems to be some close logical connection between them. Our problem is, what is this connection? Okay, he's already shown they can't be disconnected, but they can't be equal to each other. They can't be disconnected because two identical paintings by the same author around the same time, one can't be said to be good and the other one not good unless you can point to a difference between them. And if they're identical, it would make no sense. The way we use the word, it doesn't make sense. People would think you're crazy if you said this is the good one and that's the not good one. Why? Did he at least sign one and not the other? Show me a distinction, right? But if there's no way of distinguishing, so there must be a connection between the first set of categories, the descriptive, he's calling it, and the evaluative. This word good has to be connected in some way. But likewise, they can't be equated to each other because he's shown whatever the characteristics are, if we were to identify them correctly and say, what I meant was this is the sort of thing that has those qualities, if that's our definition of good and that's all good means, then what we're saying when we say that is this is the sort of painting that has those sorts of qualities because it's the kind of painting that has those qualities. We lost the word good. And we know the word good means something for these, not just because he's assuming it, but for all these reasons that he's pointing out. He's pointing out the word good means something other than just those qualities, but it's also something that has to be connected to them. And so he's set up the question pretty clearly, I think. And he says, our problem is this. This is the question he wants to try to tackle. What is the connection between the descriptive and the evaluative? For no light is shed by saying that there is a connection, unless we can say what it is. Or some light, maybe, but okay. The problem may also be put in this way. If we knew all the descriptive properties of a particular strawberry that a particular strawberry had, knew of every descriptive sentence relating to the strawberry, whether it was true or false, and if we knew also the meaning of the word good, then what else should we require to know in order to be able to tell whether a strawberry is a good one? Once the question is put in this way, the answer should be apparent. We should require to know what are the criteria in virtue of which a strawberry is to be called a good one, or what are the characteristics that make a strawberry a good one, or what is the standard of goodness in strawberries? We should require to be given the major premise. We have already seen that we can know the meaning of good strawberry without knowing any of these latter things, though there is also a sense of the sentence, what does it mean to call a strawberry a good one? In which we should not know the answer to it unless we also knew the answer to these other questions. Okay. It is now time to elucidate and distinguish these two ways in which we can be said to know what it means to call an object a good member of its class. This will help us to see more clearly both the differences and the similarities between good and words like red and sweet. Okay, so he's just trying to set up the question clearly. And he set it up with this preface that says, look, they have to be connected in some way. And the way in which they're connected certainly can't be equality. They can't just equal each other. They must be connected, but they can't be a simple equation where good means these qualities and these qualities means good, because we know it means more than what would be reduced by that into just saying this has these qualities because it has these qualities. That's not what we mean by good, and we use good differently than that. And we know that good mean we can learn good in one class, apply it to another where we don't know the criterion in that one at all. So clearly, good doesn't just equate to qualities for any class, and yet they have to be connected somehow. So how are they to be connected? Let's try to figure that out. And he says, and the way he illustrates it here is kind of interesting. He says, I can know if a strawberry is good without knowing what the qualities are that make a strawberry good, but I'd have to know the qualities that make it good to answer the question, what does it mean to call a strawberry a good one? So I can identify a strawberry as a good one. I could misidentify it as a good one. The fact that I can use the word good at all to make an evaluative judgment, even if it's a wrong judgment, means I have access to the use of the word without knowing the criteria, because I could use it in that way. Even if I couldn't answer the question, what the hell are you talking about? Explain to me what you mean by what makes something a good strawberry. Ah, it's good. I just ate one. Check it out. It's awesome. Right? I can answer that one without knowing the other one. They're different questions. Okay. Excuse me. Here we go. Since we have been dwelling for some time on the differences, it will do no harm now to mention some of the similarities. For this purpose, let us consider the two sentences M is a red motor car and M is a good motor car. The first similarity between M is a red motor car and M is a good motor car is that both can be and often are used for conveying information of a purely factual or descriptive character. If I say to someone M is a good motor car and he himself has not seen and knows nothing of M, but does, on the other hand, know what sorts of motor cars we are accustomed to call good, knows what is the accepted standard of goodness in motor cars, he undoubtedly receives information from my remark about what sort of motor car it is. Okay. So he's so look at this. He's saying this evaluative judgment is in some sense descriptive. How do I know that? How do I prove that? What's my argument? If a guy knows what makes a motor car good, how we talk about motor cars, what we think a good motor car is, and I say this motor car you've never seen before is a good one, he has received information from me about a car he's never seen before. So it must have a descriptive element. I'm telling him something true, or not even true. I'm telling him something about something he's never seen before, and he's received that information. That sounds descriptive, right? If I said John lives in a blue house, you've received information about the dwelling place of John, right? Well, he says clearly there's an aspect of saying something is good that for anybody in the know, they're able to receive information. So there's a descriptive element to this. Okay. He will complain that I have misled him if he subsequently discovers that M will not go over 30 miles per hour, or uses as much oil as petrol, or is covered with rust, or has large holes in the roof, right? Right? He'll say, "Hey, why'd you lie to me about that car? When I got there, it had large holes in the roof. Why are you, why? I never said it didn't have large holes in the roof. You told me it was a good car. That's not a good car, right?" So clearly he right? You see how he's received information. You must have been lying to me. You why? Why would you do that? But he's not going to say, "Oh, oh, I see. We good doesn't mean anything." He wouldn't say that. He would say, I know what you were communicating to me and it was this is not a car with large holes in the freaking roof, right? Okay. His reason for complaining will be the same as it would have been if I had said that the car was red and he subsequently discovered that it was black. I should have led him to expect the motor car to be of a certain description when, in fact, it was of a quite different description. The second similarity between the two sentences is this: sometimes we use them not for actually conveying information, but for putting our hearer into a position subsequently to use the word good or red for giving or getting information. Suppose, for example, that he is utterly unfamiliar with motor cars in the same sort of way as most of us are unfamiliar with horses nowadays, and knows no more about motor cars than is necessary in order to distinguish a car from a hansom cab. In that case, my saying to him, M is a good motor car, will not give him any information about M beyond the information that it is a motor car. Maybe, and that the generally accepted qualities of good apply to it, but we don't know what those are. I mean, I don't know. But he says, All you're really telling me is that it's a motor car if I don't know anything about what would make a motor car good." But if he is able then or subsequently to examine M, he will have learnt something. He will have learnt that some of the characteristics which M has are characteristics which make people, or at any rate me, call it a good motor car. This may not be to learn very much. But suppose that I make judgments of this sort about a great many motor cars, calling some good and some not good, and he is able to examine all or most of the motor cars about which I am speaking. He will in the end learn quite a lot, always presuming that I observe a consistent standard in calling them good or not good. He will eventually, if he pays careful attention, get into the position in which he knows, after I have said that a motor car is a good one, what sort of a motor car he may expect it to be. For example, fast, stable on the road, and so on. Now, if we are dealing not with good, but with red, we should call this process explaining the meaning of the word. And we might indeed, in a sense, say that what I have been doing is explaining that what one means by a good motor car. This is a sense of mean about which, as we have seen, we must be on our guard. The processes, however, are very similar. All right. So remember, he said it can't possibly be that there's an equation between these two where they're totally equal, an equality. That's not the case. But there's some similarities here. There's a lot of overlap here. You're going to get information about the qualities if you know enough about what would make something good. So there's a relationship. They're not totally disconnected, like he had said before. Like he had said before, they're not totally disconnected, right? Okay. This is a sense of mean about which we have seen we must be on our guard. The processes, however, are very similar. I might explain the meaning of red by continually saying of various motor cars, that one is or M is a red motor car. N is not a red motor car, and so on. If he were attentive enough, he would soon get into a position which he was able to use the word red for giving or getting information at any rate about motor cars. And so, both with good and with red, there is this process which in the case of red, we may call explaining the meaning. But in the case of good, we may call it so loosely and in a secondary sense. We may call it so loosely and in a secondary sense. To be clear, we must call it something like explaining or conveying or setting forth the standard of goodness in motor cars. It's got to be something like that that we're doing if we're engaged in passing judgment on many motor cars to a person who's then learning what it is that we would consider a motor car good. We're at least conveying the meaning. It's not exactly the same as just teaching the definition, right? Which maybe it's more like that with red, right? I mean, you learn red by, this is the red block, this is the not red block, or the yellow block, or the blue block. And then you start seeing red and identifying it in stop signs and motor cars and things like that. It's not exactly the same as that with good, he's saying, but there's a lot of similarity here. And we're at least doing that much. We're at least conveying the meaning incidentally when we're doing something like this. Okay. The standard of goodness, like the meaning of red, is normally something which is public and commonly accepted. When I explain to someone the meaning of red motor car, he expects, unless I am known to be very eccentric, that he will find other people using it in the same way. And similarly, at any rate, with objects like motor cars, where there is a commonly accepted standard, he will expect, having learnt from me what is the standard of goodness in motor cars, to be able, by using the expression good motor cars, to give information to other people and get it from them without confusion. A third respect in which good motor car resembles red motor car is the following: both good and red can vary as regards the exactitude or vagueness of the information which they do or can convey. We normally use the expression red motor car very loosely. Any motor car that lies somewhere between the unmistakably purple and the unmistakably orange could, without abuse of language, be called a red motor car. And similarly, the standard for calling motor cars good is commonly very loose. There are certain characteristics, such as inability to exceed 30 miles per hour, which anyone but an eccentric would be sufficient conditions for refusing to call it a good motor car. Huh, I must be an eccentric. I think there's a car that must go about 55 at top speed, but I've been thinking of buying one for a while now. Um, it's a funny little Italian vehicle, but okay. If a motor car satisfies these conditions, it is a good one. If not, not would be the sentence. And in both cases, we could be precise if we wanted to. We could, for certain purposes, agree not to say that a motor car was really red unless the redness of its paint reached a certain measurable degree of purity and saturation. And similarly, we might adopt a very exact standard of goodness in motor cars. We might refuse to name good motor car to any car that would not go round a certain racetrack without mishap in a certain limited time, that did not conform to certain other rigid specifications as regards accommodation, etc. This sort of thing has not been done for the expression good motor car, but as Mr. Urmson, has pointed out, it has been done by the Ministry of Agriculture for the expression super apple. All right. Well, I mean, it has been done for good motor car in different sub communities, right? Right. I'm sure that if you work in NASCAR, good motor car means something much more exact than it means in general for somebody who's looking to get around town or travel cross country or something like that, right? So it can be more exact or less exact, but this is his point. Okay. It is important to notice that the exactness or looseness of their criteria does absolutely nothing to distinguish words like good from words like red. Words in both classes may be descriptively loose or exact, according to how rigidly the criteria have been laid down by custom or convention. It certainly is not true that value words are distinguished from descriptive words in that the former are looser descriptively than the latter. There are loose and rigid examples of both sorts of words. Words like red can be extremely loose without becoming, to the least degree, evaluative. And expressions like good sewage effluent can be the subject of very rigid criteria without the least ceasing to be evaluative instead of descriptive. Okay, he's he's very admirably laying out very clearly the way he's thinking about these things. He's saying, look, we got to admit there's these two categories, descriptive and evaluative. There's an overlap, tons of similarity in the way they're used, in the connection between them. It can't be equality and it can't be nothing. There's something else that connects these two things together. But if you thought that, well, we use good for vague and general things, but we use red for precise things, and descriptive terms are more precise, he says that's not it. Descriptive terms can be very imprecise, right? And evaluative words can be quite precise, right? Like the descriptive qualities of a good sewage effluent are we're talking decimal points of viscosity. We're talking decimal points of intermolecular forces of attraction, right? There's scientists measuring what would make something like this a good thing for that, right? So it's very, very precise what would make something good in certain circumstances. And it's very, very vague what would make something red in certain circumstances, right? So they don't go in that direction. Whatever the distinction is, with all the similarity, they can't be equal to each other. But they can't be nothing to each other. And whatever the similarity it is, or whatever the difference is to make a distinction, it ain't the fact that one is looser than the other. That's not what it is. Okay. It is time now to justify my calling the descriptive meaning of good secondary to the evaluative meaning. My reasons for doing so are two. First, the evaluative meaning is constant for every class of object for which the word is used. When we call a motor car or a chronometer or a cricket bat or a picture good, we are commending all of them. But because we are commending all of them for different reasons, the descriptive meaning is different in all cases. So what Elena said before is clearly the reason why he's doing that, right? He's saying the descriptive is different for all these types of things. They're in totally different categories, each of these classes of things. There's something the same. There's something the same about them. The word good is used and it doesn't mean something different. What it applies to descriptively is totally different. Functionally, it's different. Qualitatively, it's different, right? Like what a fire extinguisher is used for versus what a chronometer is used for are totally in opposite directions as regards our senses and our ability to accomplish things and the way they work and all of it is different. The way they're constituted is different. All of the descriptors would be so different in so many ways, and yet there's something the same. And that's why it's the same word good that could apply to an example of either one. And he's hinting here that it has something to do with commending. We have knowledge of the evaluative meaning of good from our earliest years, but we are constantly learning to use it in new descriptive meanings as the classes of objects whose virtues we learn. All right, so we have knowledge of the evaluative meaning of good from our earliest years, but we are constantly learning to use it in new descriptive meanings as the classes of objects whose virtues we learn to distinguish grow more numerous. Sometimes we learn to use good in a new descriptive meaning through being taught it by an expert in a particular field. For example, a horseman might teach me how to recognize a good hunter. Sometimes, on the other hand, we make up a new descriptive meaning for ourselves. This happens when we start having a standard for a class of objects, certain members of which we have started needing to place in order of merit, but for which there has hitherto been no standard, as in the cactus example. The second reason for calling the second reason for calling the evaluative meaning primary is that we can use the evaluative force of the word in order to change the descriptive meaning for any class of objects. This is what the moral reformer often does in morals, but the same process occurs outside morals. It may happen that motor cars will, in the near future, change considerably in design. Example, by seeking economy at the expense of size. It may be then it may be that then we shall cease to give the name good motor car to a car that now would rightly and with the concurrence of all be allowed that name. How linguistically speaking would this have happened? At present, we are roughly agreed, though only roughly, on the necessary and sufficient criteria for calling a motor car a good one. If what I have described takes place, we may begin to say no cars of the 1950s were really good. There weren't any good ones until 1962. Now here, we cannot be using good with the same descriptive meaning as it is now generally used with. For some of the cars of the 1950 do indubitably have those characteristics which entitle them to the name good motor car in the 1950 description sense of the word. What is happening is that the evaluative meaning of the word is being used in order to shift the descriptive meaning. We are doing what would be called I'm sorry. We are doing what would be called, if good were a purely descriptive word, redefining it. But we cannot call it that, for the evaluative meaning remains constant. We are rather altering the standard. This is similar to the process called by Professor Stevenson persuasive definition. The process is not necessarily, however, highly colored with emotion. Let's pause for a minute. This is the second time where I wonder if he's made the case as strongly as he would need to, but maybe I'm missing something. So hold on. What does he mean by we cannot call it redefining the word good because the evaluative meaning remains constant. Oh, right, because he thinks that that has to do with commending. And maybe as an ancillary effect, informing people of the general standard accepted at the time by you or by other people for what types of things would qualify as good. But he's saying that hasn't changed. Right? So we haven't redefined the good part. The good part is aimed in another direction because we've changed what we value, and that has redefined the descriptive. Right? The descriptive is now no longer good. Hey, I invented the sunroof. Turns out a hole in the top of your car is a good thing. Right? Hey, we want big muscular cars that drive up the sides of mountains. Oh, now we want one that'll go 18 times longer on a single tank of gas. Well, that's a very different kind of car. It certainly can't drive up the side of a mountain the way that other one could, right? So our evaluations are changing, our values are changing. The good word still means the same thing. He hasn't yet defined it, but he said we haven't redefined good over that time period. We've changed what we value, and that's having an effect on the descriptive. So that's his second reason for saying that the evaluative is primary. It comes first and it affects the other things, not the other way around. Okay. So he's starting to get a picture of how these two are connected to each other. And one thing is that there's a primary aspect to it, right? The consequences descriptively are downstream from the evaluative. That comes first. Okay. So let's go back to the strawberry, right? I said the strawberry, it's good. Well, justify that it's good. Well, it has this quality and this quality and this quality and this quality. It's like, does that make it good? What if I want to use the strawberry today to gather scientific information about the penicillin bacteria, and I thought that it had been growing on that strawberry. Give me a good strawberry that I can use for my research today. Turns out that's the opposite of the good strawberry when you come in and you say you're hungry, and I go, that basket over there is full of the best strawberries I've ever seen. Right? So, so what makes it good is first. And so when we were trying to say, well, why can't I just give the list of descriptions that make the strawberry a good strawberry to justify that I'm calling it a good strawberry? Well, he showed linguistically what and logically what that would reduce to, which would be to get rid of a word that we know has meaning, so it can't be right. But now he's saying also the real way to communicate that it's good is to have a shared aim, a shared set of values, and to recognize the utility of the thing to us. Well, there's a subjectiveness to that, but it's not the sort of subjectiveness that weakens the idea of goodness, right? It's just it just recognizes the role that's necessary. You see, that's what I was maybe thinking. I know from our after conversations, I will be hearing people say in the first few paragraphs they thought they could maybe resolve the problem in that way, but we'll do that in the after show. All right, so this is kind of cool. I think it's impressive.
May I say
Let us,
something before
yes,
we move
please.
on? I think
Please.
that is exactly that. The last thing that you said, that there is a percentage of qualitative, how to say it? No, I'm sorry for the very wrong phrasing. Badge of okayness for the 6 things that he mentioned earlier. That list that triggered me. I think that is that. In other words, that he used, the percentage of saturation for redness. He used that for the strawberry. So maybe he used this broad. He used these examples to depict, to map out the whole spectrum, and he wants us to, from these examples, to distill the core essence of what is objective. How can we objectively characterize something as good with capital G? It does what it should do in the most efficient way, whether it is chronometer, fire extinguisher, or I don't remember what else he mentioned, the cricket bat, yes, or it is communicating or conveying its essential message, like nature, like a man, or what was the other thing? Or pictures.
Okay, so
Whether it is the sentiment of the artist, or whether it is the sentiment that the artist wants us to arouse within us.
okay, good. Let's attack the heck out of what you just said from his perspective, and let's see if it matches up. It might match up. So what I hear you saying is that, okay, so for objects, how efficiently, how well are they doing what they were designed to do? That's the question of goodness. But for persons and sunsets and things like that, it's maybe more of an intrinsic goodness. That's not the word you used. Say the second part again.
That they are sufficiently communicating and conveying their essential message.
Okay.
Was
Okay.
that it?
Sufficiently communicating their essential message. Okay. All right. All right. So maybe these other things are the types of tools that are there to say something about the universe or into the universe or something like that. And if they're efficiently doing that, that's the kind of tool they are in an analogous way, maybe. Okay, let's pause for a minute. I don't think he's making an argument that goodness is objective. And this is an important distinction here that I want to highlight right now because we should have done it a long time ago. Typically, the way we use the word objective versus subjective in our post-Cartesian scientism age is objective means actually real, and subjective means anything you feel like. It's just whatever. It's not true. I don't think that's what they mean. I think the word objective, whether people want it to mean this or not, when they're using it, it does still mean this, I think, is better understood as the distinction between I'm imagining myself outside the universe and it's just true. It's true of the objects independent of their relationship to a valuing creature. Often the thought experiment is imagine there are no people. What is true about grass? Is it still green? Right? Is it still have a tendril root system? Is it still trying to reproduce? Like, is the lead weight obeying the law of gravity? Right? Those things we think of some of them as objective. Some people do. Uh, Precisely because they say, well, we don't have to be here for that stuff to be true. And then the subjective is the things we're talking about how they're in relationship with us. Okay. I think he's arguing not for the objectivity of the goodness. I think he's arguing now. So typically we tend to think of objective as solidly real and subjective as not real. I think he's arguing for the realness of the goodness, right? So he's not saying it's not real. He's actually made very strong points that clearly it means something. And it's something that could be true about things, but it's not true independent of valuing creatures. And if the valuing creatures change what they value, the goodness of the thing changes too. So it's not true objectively in that sense of without us, it just is good. It's not like that. So maybe that wasn't your main point, but when you use the word objective in that way, I wanted to push back on that to highlight that point. Your other point, I think, might just be true, and maybe that was the main point of what you were saying. We have one more section where he's going to try to wrap this up and get us to a good place, perhaps. And he's going to talk about commending and choosing as two different ideas now. So let's just continue with a short pause because this is the longest of the 5 sections or 4 sections in this thing. So we'll just pause for a minute here. Yeah, it's the longest of the 4. Does that work, Elena, or am I not correct, or am I not being clear, or did I misunderstand your purpose, or all of the above?
It does make sense. I did understand, but although you said that he doesn't, he hasn't, and he might not even until the end of this essay say that there is an objective good. There is a hunch, to be honest, that in his list, in these 6 items, there are 3 and 3. So it's 2 fields represented by three items, alive or not, of nature or of not, that if we examine them with a magnifying lens, it that could be personal work, homework, so to say, okay, whether it is a hobby or for whatever other reason, we could gradually be led to the common goodness. It might not be a definition of two paragraphs, it might be just three words. But I do believe that if we overly examine these items and maybe zoom out and apply to find proper correspondences to a bit more elevated noetic focal points, whether it is philosophies, whether it is values, morals, virtues, whatever, we could probably and possibly find, after a long time of mapping their trails towards the objective, the objectiveness, we could possibly find the common ground of goodness.
Okay. So he is saying that. So, so this is what I'm trying to be clear about, and it's very confusing because of the way we think in our scientism age. When I say he's not making an argument for the objective good, in the sense of good as disconnected from anything that could value, it just is good. Norm, please. He's dreaming again. Okay, that doesn't mean he doesn't think good is real. Okay, the objective might be a fantasy. The idea that you could be outside the universe and then measure it from outside is a fantasy. So the entire objectivist framework is potentially less connected to what's true than admitting and agreeing and embracing the fact that you are a part of the universe and that things have meaning because they have to relate to you and to others and maybe to the divine.
Okay, this is let me add one parenthesis here. Let's say forget the six items and let's get us four, you, Mark, Sivat, and myself, and we examine a thing. We take four in distinctive perspectives, but if we analyze them, we will reach the common ground of goodness. We
Okay,
will
or we
find
might
a
not.
common ground. Oh, but we will.
What if our aims are different?
It doesn't matter. The common ground is always there. It is up to us to be able to discard what is proper to discard.
Okay.
Having in mind to
I think that's true,
to
but
find.
I think that's true, but isn't there a huge I think you understand this too, by the way, but I want to illustrate it. I think you're right, but I also think doesn't that bring up a huge question of how are we going to and how broad is that context that we have to consider in order to resolve those questions? Because clearly, two people could live their entire lives in daily communication with each other, doing nothing but arguing about whether or not something is good because they have different values. And so the conversation would have to be broader than just the qualities of the thing. It would have to be what are the right things to aim at, right? What should we be desiring? Where should we be headed? Right? All of those are subjects. I don't mean subjective like, hey, it's wishy-washy and doesn't matter. That's just a prejudice of the scientism age. What I'm saying is we might have a very profound and significant role to play in the universe as the little sparks of the divine that bring and maybe even help sustain being. Like the thing is good partly because we're here. It's also, by the way, red because we're here too, right? When we said the grass, and some people think it's objectively green, it's not. If there are no creatures like ourselves in our perception of color, it's a black and white world. There's nothing green about the grass except that when that type of there's nothing green about the wavelength that the grass emits that reflects. You can study wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation till you're dead or till the universe dies. You're not going to find greenness in it. The greenness is a part of the universe because of another part of the universe that it has to relate to, possibly. That's uh, whether we accept that or not, I think that's a better way of understanding the type of perspective that he has here on goodness. It's real because there isn't just the object. There's the object in relationship to everything else. And for him, he's making a very strong case that there is this goodness. The goodness is in the universe too. Goodness is real, right? He's saying that very clearly. So when he's not making an objectivist argument for goodness, he's not making an anti-goodness argument. He's saying goodness is more real than the descriptive factors. The impenetrability of the solid object, its solidity, in other words, its position, its location, its utility, its color, its all of the descriptive qualities of the object are less real than the goodness or not goodness of the object. He thinks that goodness is real. He doesn't think it's objective, not because that makes it less real, but because it makes it more real. I'm stressing this because the
Okay, this
assumption
is
that
so
we make
interesting.
with the word objective and subjective is always the opposite. And I think that's what needs to be, in order to understand what he's saying, I think we need to understand that it's possible to not find it desirable to argue that goodness is objective. Goodness
So,
is deeper than that. Go ahead.
so there is no objective goodness, but there is goodness in the universe. So, is there a seed of goodness within each one? And we can all acknowledge it because we all have that inherent. No.
I think there's no way of understanding what Socrates was saying on when he was talking about on the day of his death, when he was talking about rehearsing and looking back upon what he had been doing with his friends to discuss ethics and ethics alone their entire lives. He said, "We've been making arguments and we've been trying to settle questions and we've been doing all this philosophy." And then he said, "Let me pull off the mask for a minute. We've been doing something else too." And what he said we were doing is we're trying to get close to the source of all goodness, truth, beauty, justice, and love, that we might relate to it. That's subjective language. What I mean is, again, subjective means not really true in our age, but it shouldn't. It means language related to subjects, related to characters, related to personalities. It's relational. Okay. I don't think there's any way of making sense of why he would say, "Hey, open your eyes. We've been doing something bigger than just making arguments as if it's something that we could settle objectively." I'm never going to have it until after I'm reunited with that thing after death. Maybe that'll be my best chance. How do I do that? Let me untie the knots in my soul now while I have time. That's why we've been doing this ethics thing, is to get as closely oriented to that thing. But the language he's using is he's saying to relate to it. I don't think we can make sense of that unless we understand that he too had this perspective, that the thing that's more real, the source of being itself, is a thing to which we are to relate, and we are a reflection of, and we have the capacity to relate to it. And then the rest of the world is made up of things that primarily we exist in relationship to them first. Then there's a bunch of objective, quote unquote, attempts to objectively describe it. That's secondary. It's not primary. I think Socrates and he, I think the only way to understand that line from Socrates is to understand that he also has this same perspective, um, that's being put forward here in this essay, which is goodness is more real than a stone I can throw, right? I'm holding the thing. That's less real than goodness. Goodness is the same thing. It's one of the words for the same thing that makes the rock possible in the first place. It's it's primary. This is a shadow or secondary. We're not saying that has to be correct, but I think that's the right way to understand an essay like this. It's very Platonic in its psychological inclinations, right? I'm not saying it's what Plato was saying or that he was trying to, argue for Plato or that Plato would agree with these arguments. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying psychologically, this philosopher is inclined in that direction, in that way of thinking. It becomes very easy now, isn't it? Because we're going to do this in the year 2 material, which I can't wait to get to, but it becomes extremely easy to identify a thinker as Aristotelian or Socratic in their psychological inclinations. We could find a different definition for those terms, but we understand what that means. We know that those two would be placed in those two categories at least.
You're reading his essay, and I am like, I know Mr. Har or Hare, I don't know how his name is pronounced. I know you're getting there. So please pinpoint
Okay.
it and let's party with the arcade.
Okay. All right. On that awesome note, let's go on to this last section. Okay. So he keeps hinting that commending has something to do with valuations, right? Descriptive is one thing, evaluative is another. And he keeps bringing up this word commending. So we've got a hint that this might be where he's going to go on this. So let's see what he says. Commending and choosing. It is now time to inquire into the reasons for the logical features of good. Right? You pointed out these have logical features, right? There's consequences. You can't use it this way. You have to use it this way. Like this means something, and so it's not just an emotive word or something. So let's inquire into the reasons for the logical features of good that we have been describing, and to ask why it is that it has this peculiar combination of evaluative and descriptive meaning. The reason will be found in the purposes for which it, like other value words, is used in our discourse. I have said that the primary function of the word good is to commend. We have therefore to inquire what commending is. When we commend or condemn anything, it is always in order, at least indirectly, to guide choices, our own and other people's, now or in the future. Suppose that I say, the South Bank exhibition is very good. In what context should I appropriately say this? And what would be my purpose in doing so? It would be natural for me to say it to someone who is wondering whether to go to London to see the exhibition, or if he was in London, whether to pay it a visit. It would, however, be too much to say that the reference to choices is always as direct as this. An American returning from London to New York and speaking to some people who had no intention of going to London in the near future might still make the same remark. In order, therefore, to show that critical value judgments are all ultimately related to choices and would not be made if they were not so related, we require to ask for what purpose we have standards. It has been pointed out by Mr. Urmson that we do not speak generally of good wireworms. This is because we never have any occasion for choosing between wireworms, and therefore require no guidance in so doing. We therefore need to have no standards for wireworms. But it is easy to imagine circumstances in which this situation might alter. Suppose that wireworms came into use as a special kind of bait for fishermen. Then we might speak of having dug up a very good wireworm, one, for example, that was exceptionally fat and attractive to fish. Just as now, no doubt, sea fishermen might talk of having dug up a very good lugworm. We only have standards for a class of objects. We only talk of the virtues of one specimen as against another. We only use value words about them when occasions are known to exist or are conceivable in which we or someone else would have to choose between specimens. We should not call pictures good or bad if no one ever had a chance of seeing them or not seeing them, or of studying them or not studying them in the way that art students study pictures, or of buying them or not buying them. Lest, by the way, I should seem to have introduced a certain vagueness by specifying so many alternative kinds of choices, it must be pointed out that the matter can, if desired, be made as precise as we require. For we can specify when we have called a picture a good one, within what class we have called it good. For example, we can say, I meant a good picture to study, but not to buy. Some further examples may be given. We should not speak of good sunsets unless sometimes the decision had to be made whether to go to the window to look at the sunset. We should not speak of good billiard cues unless sometimes we had to choose one billiard cue in preference to another. We should not speak of good men unless we had the choice what sort of men to try to become. Leibniz, when he spoke of the best of all possible worlds, had in mind a creator choosing between the possibilities. The choice that he envisaged need not ever occur, nor even be expected ever to occur. It is enough for it to be envisaged as occurring in order that we should be able to make a value judgment with reference to it. It must be admitted, however, that the most useful value judgments are those which have reference to choices that we might very likely have to make. It should be pointed out that even judgments about past choices do not refer merely to the past. As we shall see, all value judgments are covertly universal in character, which is the same as to say that they refer to and express acceptance of a standard which has an application to other similar instances. If I censure someone for having done something, I envisage the possibility of him or someone else or myself having to make a similar choice again. Otherwise, there would be no point in censuring him. Thus, if I say to a man whom I am teaching to drive, "You did that maneuver badly," this is a very typical piece of driving instruction. And driving instruction consists in teaching a man to drive not in the past, but in the future. To this end, we censure or commend past pieces of driving in order to impart to him the standard which is to guide him in his subsequent conduct. When we commend an object, our judgment is not solely about that particular object, but is inescapably about objects like it. Thus, if I say that a certain motor car is a good one, I am not merely saying something about that particular motor car. To say something about that particular motor car merely would not be to commend. To commend, as we have seen, is to guide choices. Now, for guiding a particular choice, we have a linguistic instrument, which is not that of commendation, commonly the singular imperative. If I wish merely to tell someone to choose a particular car with no thought of the kind of car to which it belongs, I can say, "Take that one." If instead of this I say, "This is a good one," I am saying something more. I'm implying that if any motor car were just like that one, it would be a good one too. Whereas by saying, "Take that one," I do not imply that if my hearer sees another car just like that one, he is to take it too. But further, the implication of the judgment that is a good motor car does not extend merely to motor cars exactly like that one. If this were so, the implication would be for practical purposes useless, for nothing is exactly like anything else. It extends to every motor car that is like that one in the relevant particulars, and the relevant particulars are its virtues, those of its characteristics for which I was commending it or which I was calling good about it. Whenever we commend, we have in mind something about the object commended, which is the reason for our commendation. If therefore it therefore always makes sense after someone has said, "That is a good motor car," to ask, "What is good about it?" Or "Why do you call it good?" Or "What features of it are you commending?" It may not always be easy to answer this question precisely, but it is always a legitimate question. If we did not understand why it was always a legitimate question, we should not understand the way in which the word good functions. Okay, let's pause. Oh, I'm so sorry. Quick question, Savad. When the technology drops someone and I forget to add them in, can you still hear what we're saying even though we don't see you?
Yeah, I can. It was uh
Is,
it picked up like a interference, so it's like a call, someone, and it's like then it goes to phone mode where it's
yeah,
really,
yeah.
really faint. So then I have to leave and then come back to get like the full volume. But yes, I can still hear you when I'm not
So when you come back and
inside.
I forget to add you in, is it
Yep.
still low volume or can you hear it
Nope.
fine once?
Nope.
Okay,
I
I
can
see.
hear fine. I can hear fine. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I was curious about that. It happens a lot. Okay, to everybody. Okay, so this is kind of cool. Let's pause for a minute and see what he's getting at and see how convincing it is to us, because maybe it's not. But it's certainly interesting. What he's saying is, uh, here's the connection. The connection is There are relevant features about the things I'm calling good that are the sorts of things that you should take into consideration in future choices, even hypothetical choices. The word good means something only when we can at least imagine making a choice. And it's always about future choices, even though we can talk about the badness of a past action. If there couldn't be a connection between that bad action or that bad event and a future choice that we could make, in other words, to avoid such a thing or to not do the same sort of thing again, then he says, and I don't remember his argument, but I think it was pretty good. He says there's no connection anymore. You can't use bad and good anymore if in principle there's no connection to choices. So good and bad have to do with so another way of putting this would be good and bad have to do with the utility and obstacleness of things or actions or events to our aims. Because we have to factor them in when we're making choices to get from point A to point B in the future. We're that sort of a creature. And so it's adding information, it's telling us true things about stuff that is connected to their qualities, namely the qualities that they have that would make them be obstacles or agents in assistance to us getting somewhere. And if we have the ethical conversation, what we're saying is that same thing about our very aims. We're saying there's a meta aim, there's the ultimate aim, and this little aim of yours is in the way of you getting to that ultimate aim or something like that, right? So, but in any case, it has to do, he says, with choices that can at least hypothetically be thought about in the future, and it has to apply to future choices. That's why we have the conversation of good and bad. We're all trying to get from somewhere to somewhere. We don't exactly know where that somewhere is sometimes. We're trying to figure out the right somewhere to get to, and we're all working with partial maps. So when I say this is good or this is bad, I'm trying to suggest an update to your map about how to navigate the world in the future. And if I'm wrong, then I'm saying, hey, this is the way to go, even though there's actually a ditch over there. And if I'm right, then maybe you'll be more likely to get to where you want to go because there's a better way of getting there, or maybe it's the only path that gets there, or something like that. So this whole conversation about good and bad is not about the objects themselves. It's in the context of what those things do to creatures that are trying to get somewhere. Like we have ethical lives. Therefore, it's right and true for us to talk about what is good and what is bad. But what is good and what is bad is primary to the descriptions. The descriptions change, right? The moldy strawberry is very good if it's used in a lab to try to study penicillin. And that's why I put the strawberry on the petri dish in the first place. The moldy strawberry is not a good strawberry if the strawberry's purpose is to feed our hunger. But it's our aims of what we're trying to accomplish that make those descriptions become good or bad. So it's not in the description itself of the object, that's objective. It's not in the object that is good or bad. It is in the object's relationship with its qualities, the real object, and with real aims and with real good. Like the good is real, right? He's not saying it's not real because it's not in the object. He's saying it's real, but it's real because the objects alone, they're just sort of dead things floating around if there's no story to this whole thing. And characters are in stories, and we're characters, so there's a story. And we might not know what the story is, and we might not know where to that's let's have the ethical discussion. That's the starting point for Socrates. I don't know any of the answers to these things, but let's aim at whatever the highest good is. All right? And good means something. And it's not meaningful just because it's not disconnected from us. It's more meaningful because it's connected to us, because guess what? We're here too. We're a part of the universe also. And uh so enough of that, but that distinction between objective and subjective really needs to be clarified. It's probably going to be something we talk a lot more about in another context at some point. But we've gone too long without making this point. So I'll just briefly make it, and with the promise that we're going to talk about it more later. We think objective means really true and subjective means just so story. There are people who flip that upside down. There are people who totally flip it upside down and say, if it's objective, it's descriptive and it has less meaning and secondary meaning to what is true to the subjects. And the subject for some people is the divine. He's the main subject for which all the things have to relate To others, it's man is the measure of all things, right? All of the questions are still open there, but there's absolutely a difference in two major categories within philosophy about how to think about these things. And it's not whether or not things are objective or subjective. The distinction is whether or not the objective is primary and superior to the subjective or the other way around. And that's another camp. It's half the conversation. Half the conversation in philosophy is coming from people with the instinct or inclination to imagine it as what I know most is that it's like something to be in the world. Now let me go investigate what the world is like, versus the others who say, no, my identity comes from my ability to describe things that are outside myself. They're primary and I'm like a product of them. Those are the two main camps. And it doesn't mean anybody in any one camp agrees with anybody else in the same camp, right? There's plenty of different ways to subdivide it beyond that, but that's the main Fictilian psychological distinction between the camps of philosophers. And we've never read an essay all last year, all the whole works we read, and all of the works that we've read so far, where it's not clear what the relationship is of the author to one of those two camps. They're either in this one, they're in that one, or they're being crucified in both, and they're trying to reunite. Those are those consummate thinkers in our consummate thinker course. All right. So he's in that other one. But if we're living in this science worshiping age where the objective is the real, that's that value judgment. That's a value judgment. The objective would be more real than the subjective. If you've swallowed that whole, you might say, oh no, somebody quick argue that that morals and ethics and goodness is objective. Well, wait a minute, it's real. It's not real. But to call it objective is to say it's like mass. Okay. Is that something to live our lives for? Is that something worthy of the profundity of our ability to suffer, or the divine spark that we might be able to bring to to being itself, to progress it, to be a part of the ongoing creation and sustaining of being? It's just sort of something you could measure little units of and they bounce around or something. That's there's two different attitudes towards that. There's one that says, "Yeah, that's what I want it to be." And then there's the other one that says, "Oh dear Lord, please tell me I'm not in a game like that." Right? That's not worthy. That's not what I'm looking for. There's got to be something more than that. More than the objective. Okay. So, I'm done stressing it for now, but that revaluation of which would be higher is the distinction between a lot between all of the two major camps that are ever present, the rationalists, the empiricists, the existentialists, everything we're going to be looking at more. I'm going to stop talking about it now. We'll have occasion to talk about it more later. Okay, let's wrap this up. We may illustrate this point by comparing two dialogues similar to the one on pages 355 FF above. Okay. Let's just say what point? Oh yeah, that it always has to do with so the good function is connected to the descriptive, but it's primary to it, and it's only available when we're talking about at least hypothetical, but usually practical future choices. We are recommending this direction. We are recommending this path. We are saying this will help. Hey, you want to do good science? That's a good spectrometer. If you're looking for a good spectrometer, that's the one that's going to give you the type of data that you could really write a good paper based off of. This other one, that's kind of fuzzy and it's clunky and hard to use, right? So it's connected to the descriptive features of the thing, but it's to the person who has an aim and whether or not it would be helpful to the aim. Here's an insect nobody cares about. There's no criteria for a good version of it. Discover that it's good as bait for fish. Hey, I found a good one. What's a good one? A one that can be used by a fisherman to catch fish because it's particularly desirable to the fish, right? So now it becomes good or bad in its relationship to the person who has the aim. All right, here we go. Connections to choices. Person X. Jones's motor car is a good one. What makes you call it good? Oh, just that it's good. But there must be some reason for calling it good. I mean, some property that it has in virtue of which you call it good. No, the property in virtue of which I call it good is just its goodness and nothing else. But do you mean that its shape, speed, weight, maneuverability, etc., are irrelevant to whether you call it good or not? Yes, quite irrelevant. The only relevant property is that of goodness. Just as if I call it yellow, the only relevant property would be of yellowness. Right? We read an essay where that was the perspective, right? The same dialogue, only with yellow. Oh, how did I? X. The same dialogue, only with yellow substituted for good and yellowness for goodness throughout, and the last clause just as yellowness omitted. Okay, right. So Jones's motor car is a yellow one. What makes you call it yellow? Oh, just that it's yellow. But there must be some reason for your calling it yellow. I mean, some property that it has in virtue of which you call it yellow. No, the property in virtue of which I call it yellow is just its yellowness and nothing else. But do you mean uh, do you mean the electromagnetic wavelengths that it emits or reflects could be different, or and that's irrelevant to whether or not you call it yellow? Yes, quite irrelevant. The only relevant property is that of yellowness. Just as if I called it good, the only relevant property would be of its goodness. Let's consider those two conversations. There's something wrong. The reason why X's position in the first dialogue is eccentric is that since, as we have already remarked, good is a supervenient or consequential epithet, one may always legitimately be asked when one has called something a good something, what is good about it? Now, to answer this question is to give the properties and virtue of which we call it good. Thus, if I have said, this is a good motor car, and someone asks, why? What is good about it? And I reply, well, it's high speed combined with its stability on the road. I indicate that I call it good in virtue of its having these properties or virtues. Now, to do this is eo ipso to say something about other motor cars which have these properties. If any motor well, so also I want to just highlight really quickly here. We'll stay focused on what he's saying. Based on what he said before, it's also to say something about what my aims are in finding something desirable about motor cars. It's both of those. All right. If any motor car, whatever, had these properties, I should have, if I were not to be inconsistent, to agree that it was pro tanto a good motor car. Though, of course, it might, although it had these properties in its favor, have other countervailing disadvantages and so be taken all in all not a good motor car. This last difficulty always this last difficulty can always be got over by specifying in detail why I called the first motor car a good one. So this is really where we might get to aims now. Suppose that a second motor car were like the first one in speed and stability, but gave its passengers no protection from the rain and proved difficult to get into and out of. I should not then call it a good motor car, although it had those characteristics which led me to call the first one a good one. This shows that I should not have called the first one good either, if it too had had the bad characteristics of the second one. And so, in specifying what was good about the first one, I ought to have added and the protection it gives from pass to the passengers and the ease with which one can get into and out of it. I should have had many more things to list, perhaps. This process could be repeated indefinitely until I had given a complete list of the characteristics of the first motor car, which were required to make me allow it to be a good one. This in itself would not be saying all that there was to be said about my standards for judging good motor cars. For there might be other motor cars which, although falling short to a certain extent in these characteristics, had other countervailing good characteristics. For example, soft upholstery, large accommodation, or small consumption of petrol. But it would be, at any rate, some help to my hearer in building up an idea of my standards in motor cars. And in this lies the importance of such questions and answers, and the importance of recognizing their relevance whenever a value judgment has been made. For one of the purposes of making such judgments is to make known the standard. All right. Seems like he's not wanting to go further than that. So it seems highly suggestive to me that he needs to start talking about the aims of the people, right? It's the type of motor car that you'll be happy you purchased to get you from point A to point B because that's why you're shopping for motor cars. What does that entail? Oh, this whole list of things. And maybe some cars don't match certain qualities, but they have other eccentric ones that are really good. Maybe some of them match all of them, but they have another eccentric feature that makes them bad, despite the fact that, right, we could just keep adding and adding and adding and adding to the list. But the idea is, I'm without that list, I can still say, yeah, that's a good motor car. Well, what do you mean? I mean, if I purchased it, I wouldn't regret it. I mean, the use I might have for motor cars, or the use you have for motor cars, your interest in motor cars that's similar to mine, that would make the characteristics be relevant to both of us, make me say, yeah, you'll like that one. Right? We can use, like he said before, we can use the word good, and we can use it meaningfully, and we can use it to convey information without knowing the full list and all the criteria that would work. And sometimes that list would be contradictory, right? One criteria doesn't apply to this car, but it's still good. And it does apply, all of these criteria apply to this car, but it's still bad because of this other thing we hadn't considered before. So add another thing to the list, perhaps, right? It's just, you're not going to wrap your head around. You're not going to get a full definition, but you can immediately access it without the full definition. Even though also it's true that you can immediately access it, and yet it still has to have some connection. It must have some connection to the qualities, the objective qualities, if you want to call them that, of the thing itself, in how they relate to us and what we desire, or what we aim, or what would be good for us, or what aids or opposes us on our journey, or whatever. All right. When I commend a motor car, I am guiding the choices of my hearer, not merely in relation to that particular motor car, but in relation to motor cars in general. What I have said to him will be of assistance to him whenever in the future he has to choose a motor car, or advise anyone else on the choice of a motor car, or even design a motor car. Choose what sort of motor car to have made, or write a general treatise on the design of motor cars, which involves choosing what sort of motor cars to advise other people to have made. The method whereby I give him this assistance is by making known to him a standard for judging motor cars. This process has, as we have noticed, certain features in common. All right, we got to pause. We're almost done. Somebody talk. Elena, I suspect there's a part of this that's pricking at you, like there's something wrong here, right? Remember when we read the essay, goodness is like yellowness, it's properly basic? He's saying it's not. He's saying it's not like yellowness. It's like yellowness if yellowness was in relationship to the other types of qualities and all the other qualities that a thing can have objectively. But that's not yellow. Yellowness is just one of the basic qualities of an object. Goodness is in relation to all the basic qualities of the object, and in how they relate to the utility for people who have to make future choices about those things. Right? So
So,
euthanasia is bad. What do we mean? We mean if we're making a choice to set up the laws for our society, it's not going to get us where we want our society to be, to legalize it, something like that, right? Pornography is bad. Avoid this because your personal aims and desires and destiny are going to be thwarted if you fall into this pit, right? But it's true about it's referring to the thing and how the thing has certain qualities to be able to affect society or the individual, but it's also about the individual. So I'm going to shut up. Remember, we read an essay which argued pretty powerfully that goodness is like yellowness. It's basic. It's just a feature of the thing, and there's no other thing that you can't get beneath it. He's saying it's not like that. Maybe you can't get beneath it, but it's not a basic quality of the thing. It's related to the qualities of all the qualities of the thing that are relevant to people who have to make future choices. What do you think? Maybe that's too much. I don't really want to force you to spotlight what you think. I want to know, what is your internal compass telling you about which one of these is likely to be ultimately the truth? There's no wrong answer to that. I'm just curious. If you're talking, we can't hear you. That's why I interrupted you if you were talking.
okay.
You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So my inclination is to say that there is the objective goodness, such as there is the objective yellowness, regardless of the spectrum, whether it is too bright or too dark, regardless of the contrast. yellowness is yellowness. So such thing as objective yellowness exists, and replacing goodness, yellowness with goodness, that is my inclination, regardless of the spectrum. Goodness is goodness. But what I understand from his words is that according to the organon, according to the tool, or to the role of the person or of the character, there is always is there an objective list of characteristics or of virtues that after a quote unquote percentage of saturation we can say that it is yellow or it is good. But in the end, although that is what I understand, although there we could potentially create a list, a checklist for goodness, as to objectively characterize something as good or not, we always have the factor of the one that receives the impression, in Hume's words, or in other words, we have the task for which the tool is meant to be used. So there
Well-
might be objectively good, but in the end, it is characterized, the final check is upon the relation with a standalone tool, task, person, etc. Or
Okay.
need, even.
So that's different. I'm setting up for the website. While we do this 101 course, we're seeing these different generals that are commanding different armies, or these different soldiers in different camps on the battlefield of the question. And what it seems like is, if you were to walk onto the battlefield of this question, you'd go sign up to fight with G.E. Moore, right? G.E. Moore said good is a simple notion. It's basic. It's fundamental. It's like yellow, right? And he made some really strong arguments for that, right? So what I want to do on the website is set up a thing where you can just push on like an XY graph, sort of where you feel you are, and then you can change where that is, because you'll be asked more than once throughout the course to see if your views have changed at all as we introduce new people arguing in different ways. So that'll be really, really fun. It seems to me like, so I want to suggest something or ask you a question, which is this. It seems like your interest in saying, look, I think that goodness is objectively in the thing. It's really just a basic quality of things, is they're either good or not, or they're somewhat good or somewhat not. Who cares that it's on a spectrum? That doesn't negate, you said, the idea that there's goodness in the thing itself. Okay. One of the consequences of that you highlighted, which might not be your reason for saying this, but one of the consequences is that I think you want to say that goodness is real apart from my subjective judgment of it, or like how a person finds it to be, or something like that. Right? Obviously, a person could be wrong about what's good or not. If it's objectively good, they could be in error. But besides that, it's already just good. Goodness is in the universe. Now, what I want to suggest is that it is possible to have Hare's view that he's been outlining and still think that goodness is real in the universe. And the groups of people in the armies that do that is they say, no. What makes it good is in relationship to a teleology, to an aim. But there is a God, there is an arche, there is a divine aim. So everything is in relationship to that and has its ultimate definition of really being good because of its relationship to that. It's still a subject. It's still subjective in the way that Hare is talking about, but it's universally true about everything, right? So it is good because it always stands in relationship to that one personality, to that one subject. Now, I'm not saying that to say that that's what your perspective should be, right? G.E. Moore's perspective is, look, you can measure the yellowness of things. Goodness is like that. Maybe we don't have a tool to measure it, but that's the kind of thing that it is. It's just in the thing itself. Hare is saying, no, it's in relationship to things that have aims, right? And so maybe it's not right to think of an unlimited thing as having aims, because how could it want to be in a different place than it's in, perhaps? But It can be the source of aims and the purpose and the meaning of all the things and the cosmos as a whole. So there are let's come up with a term for it, although there's certainly terms for it. There's something like a divine valuation theory. And this is, I think, similar to Socrates's arche, right? He's saying there's a line here, and the material, physical, this is the shadow of the, or the art is the shadow of the shadow. But these things are shadows of the ultimate real. But that ultimate real is really real. It's universally real. It's in the universe. It's a part of the being. It's the cosmos, or in the cosmos, or outside the cosmos. But it's a part of what is real. And it's the source of why things are good or bad. So that would still give you the it's actually good or it's actually bad, but it would also swallow this Hera idea that he has that, well, things can't be good or bad unless they're in relationship with something that is bringing a value and an aim to it. So again, that's not to say that it's true. It's just to identify that it's possible to have your cake and eat it too, regarding that one aspect of why you're inclined to say that. It might not be the only reason you're inclined to agree with Moore. And I do remember Moore's arguments being very powerful. And I also think I trust that your instincts are more than just interesting. So that was the only thing I wanted to suggest about that. But I don't know what I think about this, by the way. So I'm not trying to advocate for anything. Just trying to give us a good map of what the field of this question is and what kind of camps exist and which are incompatible with each other and which overlap each other, and that type of thing. All right, this is really almost done. So did you want to say anything about that? What how does that strike you? Does that strike you as, oh, that's even worse, because now you're trying to make it even more tempting to deny the ultimate truth that I think is real, that it's good is just in the thing? Or
Okay, that cannot happen, but okay.
What?
That cannot happen.
Okay, well,
But
maybe you're
okay.
firm in your understanding. That's great. So you're secure enough in that to not feel bad about it. But in any case, if you were to imagine adopting that perspective, would your internal compass say, "Ooh, no, that's wrong,"
I'll keep it
or
for the
right or
after
not?
show. I'll keep it for the after show.
Okay, all right. Well, everyone gets to miss out on it, but it'll be good, no doubt. Okay. We thus have to distinguish, we thus have to distinguish two questions which can always be asked in elucidation of a judgment containing the word good. Suppose that someone says, that is a good one. We can then always ask, good what? Sports car or family car or taxi, or example to quote in a logic book? Or we could ask, too, what makes you call it good? To ask the first question is to ask for the class within which evaluative comparisons are being made. Let us call it the class of comparison. So there's another reason why he came up with those 6 categories, is to show the different kinds of classes by which the good could be applied. To ask the second question is to ask for the virtues or good making characteristics. Okay. So that's a good one. That we're looking at cars and I go, that one, that's a good one. I could ask you 2 questions if you say that. I could say, um, good what? It's good for getting your groceries, or it's good for winning the Grand Prix? It's good because it can pack a lot of people in. It's good for a family of 15 kids, or do you mean it's good because it'll help you pick up chicks? Like what are you aiming at when you judge it to be good? That's one question. And then the second question is, let's say I know the answer to that. We're looking for a car to do our groceries, and that's going to be reliable, that we can pay off in a certain amount of time, and it'll not break down. So I already know what would call it good. Then I could ask a different kind of question, which is, well, what makes this one good? Right? I already know what we're looking for. We're looking for a reliable car to buy that's, not going to bankrupt us and then break down a week later. So why do you think this car happens to have the types of qualities that would make it like that? Right? He says those are 2 different questions. Well, we could ask either. Now, since it is the purpose of the word good and other value words to be used for teaching standards, their logic is in accord with this purpose. Sorry, let me read that again. I didn't understand. Now, since it is the purpose of the word good and other value words to be used for teaching standards, their logic is in accord with this purpose. Okay. This is back to his commendation and future choices thing and defining good in the categories stuff, I guess. We are therefore in a position at last to explain the feature of the word good, which I pointed out at the beginning of this investigation. The reason why I cannot apply the word good to one picture if I refuse to apply it to another picture, which is identical and by the same author and painted around the same time with no feature different, totally identical, which I agree to be in all other respects exactly similar, is that by doing this, I should be defeating the purpose for which the word is designed. I should be commending one object and so purporting to teach my hearers one standard while in the same breath refusing to commend a similar object and so undoing the lesson just imparted. By seeking to impart two inconsistent standards, I should be imparting no standard at all. The effect of such an utterance is similar to that of a contradiction. For in a contradiction, I say two inconsistent things, and so the effect is that the hearer does not know what I am trying to say. Of all the essays we've read, I'm glad that one came last. Not because I think it's most right or anything, but he did a very good job of saying, look, 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 there's some people arguing it's all subjective and emotive. There's some people arguing it's objective and there's some confusion going on here, but he really spent a lot of time showing why there seemed to be confusions. And then his model he showed could handle those confusions. Doesn't mean it's right. There might be a better answer. He might actually be wrong in how he's conceptualized the problem, but it was very clear what he thought the problem was and what he thought his method would do to resolve the problem. And in short, his solution is to say valuation words are primary to descriptive words. They matter more and they affect descriptive words. Valuations are about valuing creatures that have to make decisions, and they're about teaching the standards by which something could be a good thing for that type of a creature. And then that's how he solves the problem of two identical paintings that have no characteristics that are different from one another, and how meaningless it would be to call one good and the other not good, and yet to say that goodness is something apart from just the characteristics of the thing, right? So he says the characteristics that might make it a particular thing good are not equal to what it means to be good. To say it's good is to say something more above and beyond that. They can't be just the same thing, but also they can't be disconnected. So in what way are they related? And he thinks they're related through commendation in a conversation about creatures that have to make future choices. I suspect that all of that might be just a little bit too limited to be the ultimate reality, which is what Elena is going to discuss and argue with us in the after conversation right now. So we're going to end the stream. This is our last class on the intro to ethics, where we've only focused on this one meta ethical question of the subjectivity or objectivity of moral judgments and moral statements. We will begin a full ethics course where we get to actually look at deontology and utilitarianism and virtue ethics and all sorts of other things besides just this one question. We're not going to be doing that right now or anytime soon because we are changing our calendar now. On Tuesdays, we're going to continue this course where we're looking at 8 major fields of philosophy with certain questions that are still alive and just getting a general idea of what the camps are and how they argue and that sort of thing. We did determinism and free will. We did the mind-body problem, which we're now doing again with Elena on Monday and Wednesdays. Those recordings are going out. We did the existence of God, which I thought was the best section we've done so far. And now we've done this meta-ethical question of subjectivity versus objectivity. We have 4 more sections, but we're no longer doing them Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. We're just going to be doing them Tuesday every week because on Thursdays, we're going to start the philosophy of mind. So the mind-body problem is going to be wrapped up soon. And that's sort of the intro to this, but we're going to start doing this on Thursdays. And we're also going to be doing the philosophy of religion, which is, I'm not going to reach for the book right now, but we're going to get to go much more in depth into these types of questions in philosophy of mind and philosophy of religion. Once those are done, and once the last 4 sections of this are done, we'll change the schedule again and we'll do the other Backbone 101 courses before we move on to the year 2 stuff, probably. Okay, with that, it's over. I'm going to end the stream and we're going to get right into what's potentially too limiting about this really clever type of solution that Hare gave us at the end of this section. So we're going to go to that and Elena's going to take it away. And so goodbye to the live stream people.